So I have a podcast, Catholic Latte, and I have to admit that over the years, since I've had Catholic Latte, I've learned a lot about not just social media, but communication. And so, for example, when you think about short-form content, when you think about Instagram Reels, or you think about YouTube Shorts, obviously it lends itself to a certain type of communication. So how can you capture someone's attention and give sufficient content in a minute? So that in itself is kind of a challenge. When you watch your typical YouTube video, it clocks in around 5 minutes, 6 minutes, even that's kind of pushing it in terms of attention span. But then when it comes to audio form podcasts, long form content, it lends itself to a certain, we're just hanging out. We're just having a conversation. For Catholic Latte, what I'll do is that I'll film something in the studio, which will become the weekend homily, and then I film the live homily, and then split that up into separate short videos. I've recently been reminded about the fact that basically when it comes to podcasts, it's meant to kind of lend itself to a certain, again, hanging out. We're taking it easy, kind of slowing things down. We're just having a conversation. I remember listening to a sports podcast, actually, as an example. And basically, there was a host, and basically what he was saying was like, look, I just feel like when I'm on the podcast, I'm just like chewing scenery. And it's just kind of like, again, like hanging out, taking a long time. I think priests were used to giving material or content in a short form sort of format. And not just like social media, but even think about homilies. So if a homily is like 10 minutes or longer, it seems long. And it makes sense given the format, right? It's in the context of liturgy, it's in the context of worship. But at the same time, it restricts the type of conversation that we can have, and therefore a type of relationship we can have. And so I was really thankful after conversing with Father Andrew and Father Faven in terms of the format of the mission, because I'm so used to getting the topic ahead of time. So it's like, hey, Father, we would love for you to come and speak to our group, talk about this in this particular way. Maybe it's just me, but I hate that so much. So to have a situation where it's like, hey, come for 4 days, here's our people, maybe about 200 each night, starts at 7, and talk about whatever you want to talk about, for as long as you want to talk about it. And it's like, God bless you all. So I don't know about you, but I'm having a really great time here, actually. So just the fact that there's nothing really to cover, we can just talk about whatever, it creates all sorts of interesting opportunities. So I thought maybe what I'll do today is talk about parables. So like the theme of the mission is like the biblical imagination. And I thought maybe tonight, again, we would focus on the particular genre of parables. Talking about what parables are, but also what they're not. Maybe we'll begin with that. What are parables not? Parables are not fables. Parables are not fables. Whenever you have a reductionist viewpoint with regards to not just parables, but like stories in the gospel, already it's a bad starting point, and you're about to misinterpret that passage. The thing to remember when it comes to the gospel, the Bible in general, is the living and breathing Word of God. It's relational. And so as I change and grow, the Bible, and particularly the gospel, comes alive in deeper and richer ways. That's why if you find yourself in a situation where a particular story comes up, it's like, oh, that's the one with the pigs. The moral of the story is this: there's something wrong. There's something wrong. It touches upon this passage that you find in the gospel. You find this a couple times, where Jesus tells the parable to the crowd, and then in private he explains things to his disciples. Maybe there's a part of you that hears that and thinks, well, gosh, that seems unfair. Why doesn't it explain it to everyone? It's not really favoritism, it's more of a spiritual physics thing. Who are the disciples? The disciples, they're not merely curious. We've left everything behind. We've dropped our nets to follow the Lord with the intention of becoming like the rabbi, becoming a Christ in this world. And because of that sincerity of heart, because of that generosity of spirit, it creates all sorts of interesting opportunities. It goes to the nature of trust. Bishop Barron talks about this, right? He says, Let's say there's the classic example of a boy meets girl. There's a boy who likes a girl. And so are there certain things that the boy can figure out about that girl through observation, through reason? I talk to this girl's friends. I watch her. I look her up on the internet. Kind of creepy, but that's what boys do, right? At a certain point, if I want to date this girl, gosh, I gotta talk to this girl. And that's where boys freak out, right? Now, if the boy picks up the courage to have a conversation with the girl, are there certain things the girl will say about herself and her life which coincide with the things that he already knew through reason and observation? 100%. But at a certain point, the girl will say something about herself that the boy cannot verify through reason and observation, but can still accept as being true because I trust in what you were saying, because I trust you. And what it reveals to us is that trust is the foundational principle for any sort of relationship. If you don't trust people, the relationship can only go so far. It's your choice, but just know that's the consequence of your choice. You bring it back to your relationship with Christ. It's not like Christ is being fickle. He wants to be close to us. He wants to be one with us. This high-level intimacy. But so many times we live in a space of like skepticism, toe in the water. Like I'm interested in Christ, I'm sort of enamored by certain things that he says, oh, that's clever, that's beautiful. But in terms of like the commitment where I drop my nets and commit myself to stay with Christ no matter what, that's something entirely different. Going back to the parables, that's a really important thing to bring to the table, a sense of commitment. Do I believe that Jesus Christ is Lord? And do I have this undying sense of commitment? No matter what happens, I will not leave, I will not give up. That's especially relevant when it comes to parables, right? Because even though parables aren't fables, what are parables? Parables are stories that use ordinary things to convey a spiritual truth. Parables are stories which use ordinary, natural things in the world to convey important spiritual truths. And more to the point, parables are intentionally provocative. Parables are intentionally provocative. So when you're reading the parables, there's supposed to be a moment when you're reading the parables where you say to yourself, that doesn't make sense, or that seems unfair, or I don't like that, or I don't get it, or maybe all the above. If you don't feel that, you're not praying with the thing honestly. You're not praying with sincerity. Now here's the other thing. If you give up on that point, go back to our original point, right? So you need both. I need to approach the gospel with an honest heart, even though that honesty leads me to think, well, gosh, this doesn't make sense, etc., etc. At the same time, because you're committed, I'm going to stay with you, Lord, even though this doesn't make sense to me or creates a certain uncomfortable tension in my heart. The example that comes to mind, I was doing an adult faith formation program at a parish, and basically I used Bishop Barron's Catholicism series. I'm sure many of you have seen that. Bishop Barron's Catholicism series is awesome, but it's not meant to be comprehensively catechetical, if that makes any sense. It's meant to show you that the Catholic faith is awesome. So, okay, I think the Catholic faith is like this, in terms of something really small, something like not impressive. When you watch the Catholicism series with the high production value, it's meant to lead you to think, well, gosh, actually, I didn't know that. This is incredible. This is amazing. And therefore, I want to search out for more stuff. I want to learn more. The thing is, though, when it comes to the workbooks with the videos, again, the videos are amazing. The workbooks are challenging. So I remember in my last parish what happened is we had a showing of the videos, and then we had a bunch of breakout sessions where different groups and people had the workbooks and they would work through different questions. And some of the questions were like, how is liturgy like play? And people were like, what? What's liturgy? Liturgy like play? That doesn't make any sense. And so it created a certain tension in our hearts. And here's the thing, this is the point of the story. When we asked people to sign up, I think we had 80, 90, maybe 100 people. Because people found it to be uncomfortable, next session, like session 2, 40 people. because I can't handle the tension. Can't handle it. I thought Catholicism was supposed to be smooth and easy and affirming my wounded heart. Here's something which is like hard. And they don't have skin in the game. It's like simply intellectually tough. Ugh, don't want that. I'm gonna go home and just pretend I know everything. We lost more than half the people. This is what we're talking about. So when you look at the parables, expect tension, but don't back away because things are tense, because things are difficult. If you persevere and push through, amazing stuff. So with that in mind, I want to focus on a particular category of parables. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13. Parables having to do with the kingdom of heaven. You might not know it by chapter and verse, but once I start going through the parables, you'll be like, oh, I remember this, that, and the other thing. The kingdom of heaven, you can define it in a whole bunch of different ways, but the kingdom of heaven basically is Jesus, to keep it simple. And the reason why this particular set of parables is so amazing and on point and practical is because it shows us how God's grace works in the world. It shows us how God's grace works in the world. Because a lot of times when we think about how God's grace works in the world, a lot of times we don't look at the gospel for guidance in terms of that. We kind of go based on what we think or what we feel or things that we've heard from our grandmother. I don't know what you do. But we don't look at the gospel. But if you look at the gospel, in particular this set of parables, and you memorize it, you commit these things to memory in terms of this principle, that rule, this particular dynamic, it's really helpful in terms of recognizing God in your life and how to move forward. So, to kick things off, there's 7 parables having to do with the kingdom of heaven. Parable of the sower, parable of the weeds and the wheat, parable of the mustard seed, parable of the leavened bread, parable of the hidden treasure, parable of the pearl of great price, and a parable of the dragnet. Okay, so the parable of the sower. There's a sower, and he's sowing the seed. The sower is the Lord. The seed is the Word of God, God's grace. It's being sown like everywhere. Rich soil, the path, the thorns, the rocky ground. Right away, just to kind of identify that identifies Advent spirituality. Advent reminds us that the goal of the spiritual life is not to build a spiritual rocket ship or solve a spiritual algorithm where one day if I just solve this thing, I can reach the heights of heaven. Advent reminds us that God is coming and God is already here. The already but the not yet. And so it's not a matter of like, what can I do to reach Christ? Christ is everywhere. Christ is in all things. He's constantly showering us with graces and blessings. The parable of the sower. So what do? I don't wait till the Lord is showering upon me graces and blessings. That's happening all the time. What do I do to dispose my heart to be transformed by God's graces and blessings which come to me all the time? Not just a little bit, but full court press. And what's really helpful is to look at this parable of the sower. So again, here's a sower, tons of seed everywhere. 3 times out of 4, no fruit. The path, the thorns, the rocky ground. First of all, to begin with the path. The path used to be the rich soil. The path used to be the rich soil. So imagine soil which is rich and supple and has the capacity to receive and be transformed by the seed. What happens to the rich soil as a result of which it becomes the path? Things are allowed to trample upon the path. Footsteps, animals, stuff. And all of a sudden, what was before rich soil is now hard and not receptive. A couple examples that come to mind, but the main thing involves video games. I love using this example with the schools. I'll visit the schools, talk to the boys and girls. Imagine, boys and girls, you're playing video games on end. I know, it's a stretch. What's the last thing you want to have your mom or dad say to you when you're playing video games for hours on end? Sometimes they'll say stupid stuff. My mom and dad say, well, stop that right now and pray and go to church. And it's like, that's a lie. Your parents do not say that. I've been out of the game for a while, but not that long. And what's the last thing you want to have your parents say to you? And eventually they get it, because they know. The last thing I want to have mom or dad say to me when I'm playing video games for hours on end, can you stop and help me with this thing? Can you help me with the dishes? Can you help your sister? Can you clean your room? Maybe for all kids it's always annoying to have that particular request, but I would suggest, especially when I'm playing video games, it drives me crazy, and I hate it. It's weird. I'm doing this thing. Is it bad? Well, not really. But I'm doing this thing which makes it that when someone is like, look, I could really use your help to make my life better, I'm annoyed. Crazy. Crazy. Now, it's easy to judge the kids. Oh, kids and their video games. And that's not the point. What do we do in terms of allowing things to trample upon the path? To trample upon the rich soil as a result of which it becomes the path. I remember talking to my internship pastor. He wasn't even trying to teach me. He was like, you know, Eric, as I go through my day, I feel like I'm saying no to all these things. Evil and wicked things, but also and especially competing goods. What's the enemy of the best? Not the worst. Simply the good. Give your heart to this good thing, that good thing. Mindful of that, I need to be firm. Yes to this, no to that. Now, what's interesting, I remember when he told me that, I thought, boy, that's not my experience at all. Which meant I was saying yes to everything. If you're not aware that you're in a battle, it's not like the battle goes away. You're in a battle. If you're not saying no to competing goods, never mind evil and wicked things, with clarity and firmness, you're probably saying yes to all these things. And after a while, like, I can't receive people, I can't receive God, I don't notice things, I'm impatient with people. What happened? Some variation of video games, but the adult version. I remember a long time ago, I was like talking to a friend of mine. I was stressed out and I went on vacation, and I went to Vancouver to be with my mom, whom I love. And I had a month off, actually. This is back when I could get coverage. Now I'm lucky if I get 2 weeks off. But basically, I was away for a month in Vancouver, and I'm like counting the days. It's like 1 week gone, 2 weeks gone. I am like still feeling awful. And I'm panicking, because it's like, I only got 2 weeks left. Like, what's going on? How come the energy is not coming back? And I remember talking to my campus minister. She said, one thing I found really helpful was to turn off my cell phone. And not even like put it on silent, like turn off your cell phone, or better yet, just leave it at home. You're on vacation. And within a couple days, I felt amazing. That's all it took. That's just like one thing. So obviously, I put it on you in terms of thinking about for yourself, what are things that are actually taking away from my delicate sense of attention and recollection and peace? Okay. The rocky ground. You remember how the Lord talks about it in terms of basically they can't go deep, and then the birds come and they pick up the seeds. I used to think of it like fear of suffering. It's not actually. It's the refusal to go deep. Because I don't have deep roots, when tough times come, I collapse. So it's not fear of suffering. It's like I haven't gone deep, and perhaps I haven't gone deep as a matter of how I live my life. The example that comes to mind, sometimes people are annoyed that when they go to confession, they're always bringing up the same things. Could be worse. You could be bringing up different things. But the point is, okay, why is it always the kind of the same things? And a lot of times we look at it as like a binary option. Like, here's this thing, some variation of the thorn in the flesh. You don't like me struggling, Lord. You can fix me in an instant. Why don't you take away this thing and I'll be better and I can praise you or whatever. The Lord doesn't want to simply cure you. He wants to heal you until you're fully healed and fully alive. A lot of times we kind of wish, gosh, I wish people and circumstances wouldn't push my buttons. Wouldn't that be great? And so your life becomes avoidance. This person pushes my buttons, I avoid that person, that list is getting longer. This circumstance pushes my buttons, I avoid these circumstances, and that list is getting longer. Pretty soon you're at home, doing nothing and seeing nobody. I remember when I was in seminary, I was on the movie committee. I wanted to be a filmmaker back in the day. And so when I was on the movie committee in the seminary, I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to pick these movies. I'm the movie guy. People are going to love the movies that I pick. They hated the movies that I picked. Not even a few, like all of them. And they were very vocal. You think they'd be charitable because they're starting with the priesthood. Nope, not in this case. And I was so angry. And I remember talking to a friend of mine, and he said, well, look, Eric, the reason why you're so mad is because it's the movie committee. And you see yourself as the movie guy. If it was like hall monitor, and people were criticizing you because you didn't monitor hall F, it wouldn't bring you to your knees. It's because it's the movie thing. So again, the whole pushing the buttons thing. It's not so much like I wish people wouldn't push my buttons. It's like, why do you have that button to begin with? And if you work on it and you cooperate with God's grace, pretty soon I'm not simply cured, I am healed. There is no button to push. And that gives me the freedom to be in any manner of situation. I can be with difficult people. I can be with difficult circumstances. And there's nothing to suppress. It's not like, oh, I hate you so much, but I'm trying to suppress it because I'm trying to be good and Christian. It's like, no, you don't bother me. The situation doesn't bother me because I don't have that button anymore. But you can only do that when you go deep. Now, with regards to the thorns aren't simply money. The thorns are like mammon. Anything less than God. Anything less than God. So the whole idea is that, I don't know, we have this romantic idea that I can do everything, but actually you can't. It's not simply because you're weak or you're getting older. Everyone is called to focus on the few things we're called to do carefully and well. I say that expression a lot with my own parish, and it came originally from my time on internship. So I was with my internship pastor. We were having breakfast at McDonald's, egg McMuffin and coffee. It was terrific. Irrelevant. Anyways, so we were hanging out, and I was talking to him about difficult people. And not just like in general, I was naming people. So I was talking about difficult people, and basically it wasn't so much like complaining about these people. It was like, okay, here's this person. They're not just being difficult, but they seem to have a certain obstinance. Like, not only do they not seem to be receiving the truth, they don't seem to be open to the truth. And so, what are we going to do, Father, about like this person and that person? And I thought he was going to give me advice in terms of like, well, my strategy with regards to this person is this, my strategy with regards to that person is that. But instead, what he said was, Eric, I don't think about these people at all. And I was like, what? What about St. Paul? All things to all men. And he's like, look, Eric, every day, the Lord calls me to focus on the few things he wants me to do carefully and well. For me to even notice what these things are, never mind actually do them carefully and well, I need to say no to all sorts of competing goods. If I say yes to everything simply because of the opportunity, I will have nothing left for the things of God. Okay, parable of the sower. Parable of the weeds and the wheat. There's a master, he has workers in the field, and they're trying to cultivate wheat. And then they go to bed. They wake up the next morning, my goodness, there's weeds amongst the wheat. I know, we'll uproot the weeds. And the master says no. If you uproot the weeds now, you risk damaging the wheat. So wait till the end times. And then we'll uproot these things, and you won't harm the wheat. Okay. A couple things you can say about this, right? Basically, what comes to mind in terms of the main principle. Sometimes, a lot of times, you gotta let things play out. Sometimes, many times, you just need to let things play out. There's nothing to be done in terms of alleviating the tension. There's nothing to be done in terms of removing this point of pain or discomfort. You just need to let things play out. We find that really hard. Obviously, the weeds represent evil, I guess, in the world. And yeah, okay, these things have to coexist. And what do we believe? That God's love is so great, his power is so tremendous that if he permits any sort of evil to exist in the world, it's such that he might bring about a greater good. Like, we all know that. But to remember this point, sometimes you need to let things play out. You don't have to wait for things to make sense. I often say this to the parish community. I'm not sure if everyone gets it. I tend to hate witness testimonies. I know they're necessary, I do them myself, but I think what I find problematic is that people tend to be reductive in terms of God's grace working in their lives. This thing happened a long time ago, and the reason why this happened was to bring about this insight. I'm sure that's part of it, but precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his faithful. If the Lord permits like a paper cut or someone to be mean to you as a result of which you have an aching heart, never mind liver cancer, there's a lot of grace to be obtained from that and from that, the small thing and the big thing. And the Lord might give you certain insights in terms of why he permits this as opposed to that, but for the most part, you don't know. That was never part of the deal. And in fact, if you just like let go and surrender, because I trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, that gives you a certain freedom. There are many things for which the mind was not made. I wasn't made to sit and ponder the mysteries of the universe. I was made to focus on the few things the Lord wants me to do carefully and well, and let things play out. I'll give you an example. There was a situation in the parish once where, again, it was complicated, taking place over a long period of time, and I wanted to make it better, regardless of the cost. Expenditure of energy, self-denial on my part, and I was working on it for most of the week. All of a sudden it came to Sunday, and I had the rotation of parishes just around the corner. And I was praying with the Lord, like, okay, Lord, here's this thing, it seems really important, the stakes are high, what do you want me to do? And he's like, I don't want you to worry about that at all. We got a big day in front of us, enjoy the day. That was the first time that it kind of came to me with great clarity. Now it happens all the time, now I expect it, and now I do it. Don't worry about this, don't worry about that, let this go, let this thing play out. And you realize in retrospect, actually the gospel is a lot easier than often I make it out to be. Parable of the mustard seed. The mustard seed starts off small, then it grows into a big tree. That's it. That's the parable of the mustard seed. So the idea of starting small. I remember talking to my director about this, and he said, one way to look at it is in terms of angles. So it's not so much how can I bring about dramatic change and transformation in the context of the day. How can I change the angle of this particular area of my life through a choice, a discrete choice in this moment where over time it goes here as opposed to there. And in fact, to take it one step further, if you think that the way to bring about the kingdom of God is through really flashy and dramatic action, which brings about immediate fruit, go back to this gospel. That's actually not the case. The analogy that comes to mind, remember in grade school or even beyond that, you're taking exams, and some of them are essay format, some of them are multiple choice, some are one-word answer. And a lot of them are kind of like short form, you know? So here's a question, you got a space, okay, write the answer. You can always tell when people don't know the answer because they're just writing stuff. It's like the buckshot approach. I'll just write a bunch of stuff and hopefully I get some credit. I'm reminded of a story. Someone said that she was grading papers and one of the questions was like, who's Saint so-and-so? And the guy was trying to cheat. He goes, well, good guy, loved God, died well. Nice try, 0. Right? So I'm not sure what to do. I don't even ask the question. So I'm just going to do stuff and hope I get credit. I remember I was walking in downtown Toronto. I walked by this thrift shop and there was a t-shirt that said, God's watching, keep busy. Kind of funny. And we do that, right? Like, okay, as a default thing, I'll just like do stuff. I'll just do stuff. As a result of which you're just spiritually and physically dissipated. And you're angry with people, you don't have patience. You're supposed to discover the one thing. I remember I was talking with someone, this was before I entered the seminary, I think. She was talking to me and she self-disclosed in terms of all her issues and problems, and I was trying to break it down to subcategories and issues, and with regards to this, do these 5 things, with regards to this, do these 10 things. And I'm thinking, hey, I'm being comprehensive and therefore effective. And then I brought her to an actual priest. And the priest heard a brief synopsis of what she said, and he was like, you know what? You should pray to St. Joseph. He is very powerful. And that was it. It made me want to pray to St. Joseph. But the sweet spot. So just to remember that, not just with regards to yourself, but with regards to people you're journeying with, there's always a temptation to, again, do the buckshot approach. I don't know immediately what to say, so I'll say everything. I'll do everything. It might not come to you right away, but it will, because if God wants you to say something or do something, expect the few as opposed to the many things, but then realize, well, no, I'm meant to discover it. So I wait. I discover it, then I say that one thing. I do that one thing. Parable of the mustard seed. Now, the parable of the leavened bread, it's basically this woman who's putting leaven deep into dough, I guess. And so it eventually grows and becomes a lot of bread. The principle there is what's important is that which is hidden. And the example that comes to mind, this isn't exactly word for word how the scene goes, but remember that movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe? Russell Crowe at the beginning of the movie, he's about to go home. He's a Roman centurion, and he's talking to a fellow soldier. And basically he's talking about what he's going to do. And so basically, just to paraphrase, he says, okay, when I go home to my farm, to my horses I will say this, to my son I will say that, but to my wife, it's none of your business. I would actually reframe that when it comes to God. There's like the public life, the self that I show to the public. There's my private life, who I am behind closed doors with my family, my spouse, my kids. But then there's supposed to be the hidden life, who I am in the silence of my heart before the Lord my God. Now, what's interesting, we tend to invest a whole bunch of time in the public life. How people see me, if I do this, they'll think well of me, whatever the case may be. Certainly a lot of time in the private life, maybe not as much time as we should. Almost no time on the hidden life. Whereas actually it's supposed to be the reverse. Now, I always frame this in terms of a gamble of faith. Not in the sense of like the temptation of Jesus in the desert. So it's not like, okay, I gamble on my faith, I throw myself off a cliff and hope to God the angels catch me. It's not so much that. The gamble of faith in terms of like when I pray, when I'm behind closed doors and it's me and the Lord, to focus simply on being with the Lord who sees in secret. Sometimes the Lord calls you to process things with Him, to workshop certain issues and problems. But if you're honest, most of the time He does not. Most of the time the invitation is like, look, I know you got problems, I know you got worries, I know you got concerns, I know you have deadlines, but you know what? Put all that aside and come away and rest for a while. Just be with me. Just be with me and trust that all those things will be taken care of. I gotta tell you, recently, a lot more recently than I would care to admit, I started doing that. And what I found was that when I started praying in that way, I started changing. And because I was different, all these things kind of fell by the wayside. Some of them fell away because God is just good and He just takes care of your stuff. But in terms of like my limited participation, in terms of working through these things, it was so much easier because I was different, because I invested in putting God first in all things, especially in the context of prayer. If you focus on that, everything else will be given to you as well. Now, the parable of the hidden treasure, there's this guy, he is searching for hidden treasure, and he finds it. And instead of just taking it and leaving, he buys up the entire property. He sells everything he has to acquire that one property, to obtain the hidden treasure. Now, it's one of those things. It's interesting what he doesn't do. Imagine you're traversing throughout the countryside and you discover a buried hidden treasure. One way to approach it is I just take the treasure. Why would I sell all my stuff to buy the property in which the treasure is contained? But this guy has a proper intuition that in order for me to properly possess the hidden treasure, I need to sell everything I have, to possess fully and properly the thing that I ultimately desire. It's a really important point. Something in me has to die to fully receive that which is new. Like, you can't be married to two people. So it's a variation of, like, you cannot love both God and mammon. It's not because God is mean or fickle. It's like, well, no, that's the way it goes. You cannot be happy if you have a divided heart. I'll give you this example that I told to the parish this weekend. I'm not sure how this parish will receive it. There was a friend of mine, he was on a road trip to have sex with this girl. And he called me up. And he wasn't Catholic, he wasn't Christian, he knew I was. And he said, okay, Eric, you tell me what's wrong with premarital sex. You tell me what's wrong with premarital sex, and don't give me Abraham and Isaac. Okay. So I said, well, whatever you do with your body conveys meaning, whether you like it or not. Handshake means friendship. High five means local sports team won. What does the marital act mean? What does sexual intercourse convey? It conveys this reality that I give of myself entirely to you in a permanent way, which is open to life. And the question is that true or is it not? The only situation where that's actually true is in the covenants of marriage where the couple is open to life. Anything which deviates from that, whether we're talking about masturbation, pornography, premarital sex, betrays a certain disconnect between what you're saying with your body and your actual situation. You might deny that. You might not even know about this principle. But the reality is you cannot be happy if you have a divided heart. You cannot be happy if you have a double life. You need to be going in one direction. You cannot love both God and mammon. Now at this point, I thought I lost the connection. And all of a sudden he was like, you know what? That makes sense. And then he said, you know what? When I think about my past sexual history with my last girlfriend, the way he framed it was like, I've been around the block, but she's been around the neighborhood. And he said, I always felt because of that, she couldn't give herself to me emotionally in the way that I would have wanted or in a way that she would have wanted. And that left us both kind of wanting, and it really had this negative effect on our relationship. Now, just to be clear, I mean, in sharing with you this story, I'm not saying that if you struggle with sexual sin or you have struggled with sexual sin, like happiness is beyond you. It's not that. There's always an opportunity for fresh starts. Regardless of what's happened before in the past, regardless of your apprehensions about that which is to come, recognize this principle. I want integrity. Beginning today, I don't want to live with a divided heart because I know it makes sense. That's the prerequisite to the peace that I'm looking for. So you have to sell out for the Lord. The parable of the pearl of great price is kind of interesting. Here's this guy, he's a merchant of fine pearls, and he has a bunch of pearls in his repertoire. And all of a sudden he discovers the pearl of great price, and he sells all his pearls to acquire the one pearl. Now again, what would you expect? Looking at the story, you would expect that the guy would have sold some pearls, maybe most of his pearls, but all of his pearls for the one pearl. That just seems imprudent. But you got to realize that he never wanted to be a merchant of fine pearls. He was always in search of the one pearl. And the whole point is that once I discover that one pearl, I'm done buying and selling and haggling. I spend the rest of my life in contemplation. I spend the rest of my life in contemplation. When it comes to prayer, there's like vocal prayer, Our Fathers, Hail Marys, Glory Bees. There's meditative prayer, where I have, for example, the gospel. I apply my intellect, I apply my imagination to unpack the thing. There's also what's called contemplative prayer, where I just rest with the Lord. I behold him, he beholds me. And we just rest in each other's presence. I think a lot of people, if they pray, they do a lot of vocal prayer, maybe some meditative prayer, but we almost do none of contemplative prayer. But that's actually really, really important. Something which you might find kind of helpful is to bring this mentality to the Sabbath day. So to think about the Sabbath day, right? If you treat the Sabbath day like your catch-up day, all the things I couldn't do earlier in the week, I just do it on Sunday, kills the Sabbath day. Even if you look at the Sabbath day as this is a day where I'm called to rest so I can work better on Monday, still kills it. Because it has this element of functionality and efficiency. The way to approach the Sabbath day is this is a day where the Lord calls me to be useless. This is a day where I'm called to do useless things with my useless family and my useless friends. Isn't it great to be Catholic? I spend a whole day where I live and abide in a stance of contemplation. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to be anything. No sense of compulsion. No sense of being driven. I can just be and rest in the fact that I'm loved by the one who has loved himself. If you simply make that shift, that change with regards to receiving the Sabbath day, it changes everything. And let's say on top of that, you incorporate that in terms of your daily prayer life. When I pray, my default thing is contemplation. I don't have to do anything, I don't have to say anything. I'm pleased by the fact that the Lord is pleased that I simply showed up. That's going to change your life. Final parable, the parable of the dragnet. So basically the image is there's a bunch of fish, and there's a bunch of guys on the shore, and they're sorting out the fish. So basically there's two piles. There's the pile of fish you keep, the pile of fish you don't keep. Now what's interesting is the gospel is originally written in Greek. So what you find in the original Greek, it's very stark and very much a binary option. The two piles are fresh and rotten. Is this fresh? Is this rotten? Now, obviously, you can look at it in terms of the final judgment. So whatever you become, okay, this pile or that. And it won't be a matter of haggling or like, yeah, but. It's like, no, like obviously this as opposed to that. It's a very sobering thought. But you can also apply this principle to spiritual warfare. I remember talking to my spiritual director, and he wasn't trying to teach me at this point. He was just kind of saying it, but sometimes that's the best stuff. And he said, you know what, Eric, if I were to guess, I would say that we're called to ignore 9 out of 10 thoughts all the time, throughout the course of our day, throughout the course of our lives. When I heard that, I thought, wow, I thought it was just me, right? Because what he was saying was that 90% of your thoughts are total garbage. You shouldn't be surprised by that. Shouldn't be scandalized by that. Don't be worried about that. But have the sense of clarity. Ignore, 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 times 9. Maybe that 10th thing. Okay, we'll talk about it. The way I like to frame it with people, it's like, you think about the Blessed Virgin Mary. There's a bunch of things happening around her around the time of Advent and Christmas. Occasionally she keeps and ponders these things in her heart. For the most part, no. So you're going through your day. Here's this thought. One way to look at it is, okay, here's a moment of discernment. Is it from the Lord? Is it not from the Lord? Is this a particular thought that the Lord calls me to taste and see and keep and ponder, like a diamond in the light? If so, by all means, savor that particular thought. Make it a part of you, because through that thought, you're meant to find life. But if not, reject it. It's going to feel silly, because imagine you're going through your day, 10 thoughts, you ignore 9 of them, you savor possibly the 10th one, rinse and repeat, the rest of the day, the rest of your life. It feels oppressive, but I gotta tell you, like once you get in the habit of doing that, your mind is freed up with all sorts of possibilities. Your mind is freed up to receive and to notice and be transformed because you're not weighed down and encumbered by all these useless thoughts. I want to end now with this example from a movie. I'm sure no one's ever seen it, but this is the best way I can think of to illustrate this point. The movie is called The New Mutants. Yeah. It's based on the X-Men comic books. There's these mutants and they have superpowers, and they're in this mental institution. And basically, it's pretty evident what most of the powers for the people are. So one person can fly and this sort of thing, right? So the one exception, though, is this one lady. And she has an indigenous background. And you can't tell for the longest time what her power is. But then later at the end, you figure out what her power is. Her power is she can take your deepest fear and make it real, and it'll kill you. And so what happens, at the very beginning of the movie, she's talking to her father, and she recalls this indigenous parable. It's a real indigenous parable, told in different ways, but basically the parable goes something like this. There's a grandfather talking to his grandson. And the grandfather says, in the heart of every person, there's two bears. There's the bear which is good, represents everything which is good and noble in the heart of a person. On the other hand, there's the evil bear. Evil, wickedness, selfishness, rage. The grandson says, grandfather, which bear wins out? The grandfather says, the one that you feed. So what happens at the end of the movie, this girl who has the power to make her fears real, she is knocked out. And she kind of doesn't mind because in the meantime, she's made manifest her greatest fear. This huge demon bear, the personification of this parable. And this demon bear is just like fighting all her friends, and they are losing. And they are dying. And she's so afraid she doesn't want to wake up. And she's talking to her father, who was killed earlier in the movie. And the father says, honey, you gotta wake up. And she says, no, I can't, because the bear's too big. And he says to her, you're bigger. So she gets up. Her friends, they're like dying. There's this huge bear, flames coming out of his eyes, roaring. It's in a church, actually. It's kind of interesting. And she's this little girl. And she's like, stop. No change. Bear's still roaring and stuff. And she's like, no. And the bear kind of quiets. And he stops. And he gets small. And she puts her hand on his nose. And it's like, it's okay. It's okay. And then he disappears. St. Ignatius talks about this. He says, one way to deal with the temptations from the devil is to be firm and to not be afraid. Like in a certain sense, the devil's power is rooted in fear. And if somehow the devil can make you believe that fear is all there is, he can kind of get you. But if you realize, well, no, like, I have everything I need to win this particular battle because the gates of hell will not prevail. Okay, that changes everything. Not only should you not have fear, you should have tremendous courage. So you're tempted to give into discouragement. You're tempted to give into this particular sin. In a certain sense, get angry. Get mad. No. I hold all the cards. I'm a son of God. I'm a daughter of Christ. And with God, I can do all things, and you have no power over me. If you get used to that and you hold firm, you will win.